Hello, and welcome to another episode of the First Time Founders podcast, the show where we talk about how to start a business from nothing and grow it into something meaningful. I'm Rob Lydiard. I'm a professional implementer of the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS, which means I work with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial leadership teams to help them get more of what they want from their businesses. That's my day job, but in my spare time, I love talking to entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial people about the first time founder journey, the highs and the lows, and those of us that have done it, what we learned along the way, and that we can pay forward and share with others to help them make their own mistakes rather than just repeating ours. If you're interested in the first time founder journey, being one, working with entrepreneurs, please reach out to me. My contact information is always in the show notes. I'd love to hear from you. Today, we're speaking to Matt Phelan, who's a co founder of the Happiness Index, about what happiness in the workplace looks like and how one can go about achieving it and why one should think about going and achieving it. Whether you work in a big business like Matt works with the RAC, Fuller's, Unilever, so he's got some really big clients, but also works with small businesses, and a lot of what he teaches around workplace happiness and individual happiness is as relevant to running a small company as it is to a big company. That said, Matt also is honest about the fact that not all companies are that interested in happiness, or certainly leaders that are buying on behalf of companies. In the interview, he references that a third of CEOs don't really want to know about employee happiness or the difficult issues that might be driving unhappiness. So in this episode, Matt talks about how he went about developing his go-to-market muscle and his pitch methodology for the Happiness Index to make sure that he wasn't wasting his time trying to convert and evangelize to customers that are just not the right fit. So I think you'll get a lot of value from this episode on multiple levels. So without further ado, I give you Matt Phelan of the Happiness Index. Matt, welcome to the First Time Founders podcast. Thank you so much for doing this, sir.
Thanks for inviting us on, Rob.
So we're going to get into happiness data for the purpose of this conversation. Before we do that, would you mind giving folks a sense of where you come from and what you do?
Yeah, so my career started a little bit differently. Started working with animals before I worked with human beings. And I would say to this day that I believe that animals are better communicators than human beings. And we'll talk about that later, Rob. Then I sort of had a few entry-level jobs, sort of had this sort of like, the only really thing that I had in my head is if I moved to London, that might be a good idea, but I didn't really know why. So I went to London, got a job at a publisher that got acquired by the Guardian newspaper. So worked in those two businesses for a while. Then I got my dream job at, I always thought it'd be really cool to work in like one of the big ad agencies and that stuff. I got my job there and I hated it. Probably you would describe that culture today as toxic masculinity, but we didn't have that language at the time. So that led me to the title of this podcast of my first business. I just started a business because I didn't want to be working in the business that I was in that didn't have a great culture. So I wish it was more visionary than that, but that was called 4Ps. It was in the early stages of digital marketing when it wasn't saturated, and things like Facebook were new, things like Google were still relatively new. And we managed to scale that rapidly to an exit, but it was very stressful along the way. And we started collecting data about how we were feeling, how our employees were feeling, and how our customers were feeling, so we could optimize our company culture. And that led into a business called the Happiness Index, which after we sold our trade sale of our first company, we took a lot of that money that we took from there and invested into the Happiness Index. So now, my day-to-day role is running the business, but I also have a separate role as a speaker and author where I share all the data around what we're learning. So yeah, I don't know how long it took me to do that, but that's my career, Rob.
Fantastic. So I really would like to talk about your sort of data-informed insights. When we talk about the data broadly from the Happiness Index, what are the constituent parts of that? Like, where does the data come from? What sort of things are monitored? And then we can go into how it relates to the founder journey.
So firstly, everything's anonymous. So everything we're collecting is anonymous. I don't know who's saying it. And it's all fed into a huge database. We're collecting from employees all around the world. At any one time, maybe 2 million employees from about 100 different countries. So we pull that into a big data set, and then we use our algorithms to learn from that data set, like what drives happiness, what drives engagement, why are people unhappy, why are people leaving, why are people most unhappy after they've worked in a company for 4 years? and all these big questions like, and it changes from country to country, but perhaps why are people aged between 35 and 45 the unhappiest group in the workforce? So these are the questions that come up on a client by client basis, which we answer for the client, and that's what we do. And we're an employee engagement and happiness platform. But out of all of that comes the macro data, which we analyze and share. So quite regularly, we're sharing what the top drivers of happiness are, as an example.
Wow. So when I say the term first time founder to you,
Yeah.
what kind of comes to my, because I some of the lowest points of my life and some of the most elating are from my first time founder journey. But I'm just curious as to
Yeah,
what puts into your mind.
it's duality of emotions. It's if I had even when you like, anxiety was the first thing the first word that came into my head, but then excitement, and then fun, and then scared were the first. They were the first things because have you got children, Rob?
I do, yeah. One son.
Most stuff that you do first time comes with a manual that's quite useful, or but having children and running a company, they don't come with a manual, and whatever you read about in the books is just it may be factually correct, but you cannot experience it until you go through it. And
Yeah.
it's just like most people have babysat before they've had a kid, but you've no clue, you've no idea how hard it's going to be and how brilliant it's going to be. So it's the only parallel that I can draw for someone is first time parent and first time founders are the same mix of excitement, scared, anxiety, everything.
When you is it your view that for a first time founder you have to manage your own happiness in order to be able to create a good environment for other people to be fulfilled working for you, and you ultimately to deliver the vision? Or is that not the way you think about it? Like, how I don't know. I don't know if I thought very much about happiness on my first time founder journey. I thought about, like, my happiness, I mean, but I definitely thought about the colleagues' happiness a lot, almost too much when I was very green, because I felt so grateful that they came to work for my company. I actually often didn't even expect that much in the first few years. I just wanted them to be happy, even if they were doing a terrible job.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think about it now as a second time founder, but did I think it about then? I suppose a driver was my own happiness because I didn't want to be unhappy working for someone else,
Yeah.
and um, I I didn't grow up with money, so I was thinking about, oh, I could build this company, I could sell it, and it could change my life. So there was definitely factors involved in why I set it up and why I wanted it to be a success. But the quote that we used, we got from Richard Branson, which he used to say, um, customers don't come first, employees come first. Then if you look after your employees, they look after your customers. If you look after your customers, you make more money. And there's obviously more to it than that. But that's what we were thinking about, and that's what led us down the path. And the reason we built the Happiness Index is because we wanted to track it. Because I also knew companies that were successful but treated their employees really badly. So I didn't want to be an employer that treated their employees badly, but I did want to know it was morally the right thing, A, and B, is it actually, as CEO, is that the right strategy? Because if I could align, we call it heart and brain, aligning what's in your brain and what's in your heart. And if you can align the two, that's where success comes from. And I knew in my heart it was the right thing to do. But you need to know, is that the right, is it the right way? And once you start to see the research and body behind that, it's really clear that happy employees are more productive, they sell more, they're more creative, and loads of other stuff that we can talk about, and I've written about in my books. But it was definitely a journey of discovery. You don't. That's the beauty of being a first time founder. You don't know anything.
Yeah,
And
you
that's
knew you might not start.
yeah, and maybe you'll start another podcast called Second Time Founders. But the hardest thing about being a second time founder is you know how hard it's going to be. So there's a real beauty in not knowing what's coming down the road, and I think that can drive you through 3 or 4 years sometimes. But second time founder, you know, actually a lot of what you achieved came down to luck. So you start to think like, oh, what happened if that client hadn't signed? or whatever. So there's a real beauty in being a first time founder that I would, I'm just a big advocate for taking that choice.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Okay, so what drives happiness in the average startup from your perspective? Is I assume it's not a one size fits all, but I'm guessing there seems to have been a move away recently from foosball tables and swings in offices and the like.
It's a really good point to mention the physical tables. Generally speaking, there's hundreds of thousands of studies on this, right? But to sum it up, to answer your question, generally speaking, stuff that makes you happy wasn't invented in the last 1,000 years. And that's just a good thing to keep in your mind when you're thinking about how all of this works. Because if I give you an example of something that is relevant, not just in a startup, but let's focus it at the startup, acknowledgement is a top 4 driver of happiness. So acknowledging one of your team and using and saying things like thank you when they've done a lot of work is a huge driver of happiness. Another driver of happiness is psychological safety.
Okay.
Now, psychological safety is one of the hardest things to get right in a startup, because you probably know the stats more than me, Rob, but I remember when we started, I remember our accountant saying, you do know that 90% of businesses fail in the first 3 years and 95% in the first 5. So should you there you go, you're hiring someone on day one, there's a 10% chance their job's not going to be around. So psychological safety is a really important part of happiness. And I think I don't know how true this advert is, but have you seen the advert where they're applying for people to go on the polar expeditions in like 1910 and stuff like that?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, who knows whether that advert's true, because I've never been able to fact check it. But for those that don't know what Rob and I are talking about, is there's an advert for people that want to join like the polar expeditions, and the advert makes it really clear this is a horrible job and the likelihood of dying is quite high. But loads of people apply for it because, one, it shows this sense of adventure, but two, people are being really honest. My thing on psychological safety for first time founders is just be really clear. And I've described the happiness index up as a scale up now, but see it as my job to put people off joining us.
That's
So
interesting.
when I interview them, I tell them all the bad stuff first. I'm like, this is all the bad stuff that you need to know of what it's like to be in a scale up. And obviously the first year to 2 years of a startup is different, but it's better to just let that out, let people know, because the people who are up for that are going to go, wow, that's great.
Totally.
But the 90% of people that are not, it's better for them to know and just go, actually, thanks, Matt. I remember bumping into someone 10 years later that we hired into our scale up. His name is Mark, so I won't say his whole name because I haven't got his permission. But I tried to hire him in the first business when we were really early, and I said, "Oh, out of interest, because you didn't want to join last time, what makes you want to join now?" And he was like, "You were just like really scared me, like when you said it was going to happen." And I was like, "But I was being honest." And he said, "Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and that's why we're chatting today." But he joined the happiness index when it was more of an established business, and he was brilliant in an established business, but he wouldn't have been right for a startup. So there's just a couple of drivers of happiness. And I should share that the number one driver globally, which is positive relationships. Now, generally, if you look at the data set, Rob, the larger the company, the unhappier are the employees.
Yeah, makes sense.
The smaller the company, the happier the employees. And I think a big driver of that in startups, which you can get, which, like, if Steve Jobs came back alive tomorrow and said, right, I'm starting a new business, and you got the chance to go on that journey, there's loads of people that would probably want to go on that journey and learn. So startups offer that unique opportunity to get into the like core team early. It's just making sure they know what they're letting themselves in for, because on the outside, startups look like fun and brilliant and all this kind of stuff. But we know, everyone listening to this podcast knows, it's 90% really hard, repetitive work. And then it's the 10% where it's like the thing happens and it's everyone celebrating.
It's really interesting. I totally agree. When we talk about recognition. I think you used a different word, but recognition, psychological safety, and did you say meaningful relationships? Was the word you
Positive
used?
relationships.
Positive relationships. Um, even terrible startups, I think, try to, maybe not so much psychological safety, but certainly try to um, certainly do two of the three. In your experience, what are the primary failure modes, particularly around recognition and positive relationships? Is it where a founder is a bit theatrical about those things but doesn't really mean it?
So the wider phrase is feelings of acknowledgement, and recognition is one part of acknowledgement. In recognition, the main failure is, without geeking out too much.
No, geek away.
Okay, you might regret that. Of the top 24 factors that drive happiness and engagement, recognition has the highest standard deviation. What
Okay.
that means is the way that people want to be recognized is very different person to person. Positive
Okay.
relationships has a lower deviation. What that means is what we seek from relationships is quite similar. Now, I had someone on my podcast, Happiness in Humans, who was a recognition expert, and he gave a story, a really great story of Simon Berry he's a recognition expert around the world. He gave a story in his first job where if you met him, he's really understated, very private person. And I think he said it was in the 80s, and he got like the big golden watch for being like the number one salesperson. And it was his worst nightmare. Because I'm the same. I don't wear any jewelry. I understand what he's saying. So the company gave a piece of recognition, but it actually made him feel sad on two reasons. One, he's not bling. Two, that means you don't really get him because you've given him something that he's not really into. And then the irony of this story is he privately sold it, and the company found out that he'd sold it, and then they got really annoyed. So, but isn't that? You think about all the birthdays you've ever had. Think about that. Like, it's not necessarily about the present. It's about when that person that you think really knows you gets you something that you don't really like. So, um, to answer your question, one of the main failure points in recognition is where people try and recognize someone, but they haven't done the homework to think, you know what would Rob like?
Yes. Oh my god. Yeah. Okay. Now you framed it like that, it makes sense. So, for example, I started my career as a corporate lawyer. Right? They psychologically screen kids that have a need to please, that are going to stay up all night, won't sleep for 2 or 3 days if the deal depends upon it. Okay, so that's quite deep in my wiring. If you need me to do something for you, I will. Until my until my body or will gives out, I'll be there. Um, but I don't want to be celebrated for diving on the grenade, right? I want you to try and make sure it doesn't happen to me again.
Got you. That's a really good example. The example I use a lot is I gave our CTO a public shout out in a
Okay.
company update. His worst nightmare. And I know this. I worked with him for 17 years. Should know this.
Yeah.
What he would like is go for a cup of coffee with me. I mean, to say that privately. So I know that. So even when you know the data, you still make mistakes. Just want everyone to know this. Like the happiness index, we still mess things up with our own employees. The data just makes you make less mistakes. That's what I think.
That's astonishing. So, and do you advise clients, whether they're big or small companies? I mean, what can they create an environment where they're more likely to make their people happy, behaving in a way that comes naturally to the leader or founder by being sort of clear on what the culture and the norms of the organization are when the person comes in? Or do you, as a great leader, do you always have to be alert and empathetic to what the individual employee wants, and you can't really just create a sort of overriding environment from culture to increase your odds?
So what you can't do is you can't make anyone happy. Just like you can't make your partner happy, you can't make your children happy. All you can do is create the ingredients in the environment. But then it's still a two-way street because
Good on you for correcting me for saying that. I totally know what you mean.
yeah, but it's a two-way street because and also it's another issue with the whole subject is high happiness is not good and low happiness is not bad. That's a preconception people come to the conversation. So they might book me as a happiness speaker, and they'll be like, right, Matt's going to come on, he's going to make us happy. But who's to say that high happiness is good and low happiness is bad? What is important is to, in a company corporate perspective, is understand what's making someone unhappy. Because what's making someone unhappy may be something that you can't fix. For example, they've had a bereavement in their family. If someone's had a bereavement in their family and you're trying to make them happy, that is the complete opposite to what you should be doing. You should just be giving them space to go through that process. So
Wow.
what we say is you can learn as much from unhappiness as happiness. And ultimately, your job as a leader is to fix as many of the things that are making people unhappy when you can. But you have to acknowledge that there will be times when stuff is going to happen. We see it all the time. Again, I don't know why I'm talking about death a lot today, but
I bring that out in people.
yeah, it must be this podcast and talking about my memories of starting startup. But if one of your colleagues has died, it is gonna massively impact it. And the funny side I always say of it is, if you go around, have you ever seen two people having an argument and someone tells someone to calm down?
Yeah, that goes well, right?
Yeah, never in the history of anyone telling someone to calm down has that ever happened, right? Because emotions are what you feel. They're not rational thoughts. You can't tell someone how to feel. And
Hmm.
happiness is the same. So if you go around the office telling everyone to cheer up because you've got a happiness target, likelihood is you might get punched in the face. So just
I-
a few preconceptions I just want that people often come to the subject with that I just wanted to unpick because they're important to understand.
would you mind if I loop right back round to your own founder journey? Because I'm going to get a bit meta, but that must have been that's an incredibly nuanced perspective to bring to market. It's powerful, and I can see why that's so valuable to your clients and stakeholders in your ecosystem. But how long did it take you to get to a place where you had an informed perspective, where you're almost willing to challenge the market? And did that speed up your growth or slow it down? Did you find that there were quite a lot of crap companies that were coming to you to put a sort of plaster over that gaping wound in their culture and leadership capabilities? Can you just
Yeah,
talk about that? Because it must have been a moment where you had an epiphany and then realized that
yeah.
it might not be what the clients wanted to hear.
Yeah, so there's two parts. I'm going to answer it the wrong way around, which is I'll start
Perfect.
with the future and then I'll come back. Which is, I believe roughly about now, if we broke CEOs down into thirds, I think one thirds don't want to know, don't
Yeah.
actually want to know the bad stuff that's going on in an organisation.
Hmm.
There's many reasons for that, but let's say, for example, the data shows that there's a racism issue in the organisation. Not every leader is equipped and ready and wants to deal with an issue that serious. Even though most people listening would think that is a serious issue, you need to deal with it.
Correct.
You can change the word. You could say, let's say there's an uncovered mental health issue. Let's say there's a bullying issue. Some leaders prefer not to know. We're not going to get into the whys of that today. There's one third who I believe intuitively get it. They're like, yeah, no, it makes sense. Makes sense. Look after people, they'll look after you. And there's about one third in the middle, which if you show them the data and you show them that this is good business sense, they'll come along on that journey. So, but where we discovered it is the happiness index for 2 years before it was a commercial product was an internal tool at our marketing agency. So we learned the hard way because we made it targets ourselves. We were the people saying, come on, let's get everyone happy. And then we realized this is a terrible idea. And now, because I've made that mistake myself, in that one third, there are some people who might put the tool in to just get high numbers, but it's not sustainable, and it's not going to work because if you are happy all the time, that is potentially as a serious mental health issue as if you were unhappy all the time. The energy required to output happiness all the time isn't sustainable for your body.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So it's the I can't remember the exact guy's name, and he's much smarter than me. But there's a saying that once a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a useful metric.
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about here. Happiness is a metric, not a target.
So, do you find that you actually that third you almost need to disqualify that organization from your sales funnel, right?
So
Like
I can
it's not going to be able to help them.
hopefully help out one first time founder. When I finished my first business, I analysed all my time for 10 years. I calculated that I wasted 50% of my time. So 5 years, that's how geeky I am. I went back and I analysed my time. 50% of it was wasted. I could have achieved what I achieved in 5 years if I changed one thing, which is we were in the world of digital transformation. I was trying to convince people that they should transform their businesses that weren't ready to be transformed.
Yes.
All the successes we had with all of our clients, all these renowned brands that have kicked on and done well, and even we were in really early stages of people like Gymshark, a tiny, tiny part of their journey. They didn't have to be convinced
Yeah.
that it was. If you've got to remember, it's really early days where people are going, well, people are never going to buy a pair of jeans online. It's never going to happen. So I spent 50% of my time trying to convince those people, you know what, you need to get here or your business is going to be, but actually those people weren't ready. And some of their businesses failed, some of them caught up later down the line and all this kind of stuff. But actually it's the same here. If we meet people in the sales process, we started a call with a HR director and they addressed me directly and they effectively said to me, do you want to make one thing clear? I don't like people. And they're a HR director. So that person's never going to be convinced to work for a company like the Happiness Index. So it's better to go, look, this is a short version of how I went about the conversation. I think there was 6 people on the call. Said if we stay out here for six people for 1 hour, we can do the maths. That's 6 hours. Let's not go through this. Let's not put the charade up. I didn't say the word charade. I was much more polite.
Yeah.
But we called the meeting early and finished in 10 minutes because in my old world, I would have been like, right, brilliant. Here's someone to convince.
Yeah. Let me convert you.
Yeah, but that person's not ready. You've got to have the two parts again, the heart and the brain. You've got to really want to, and it goes back to, I think, Rob, you asked me a slightly leading question, which is around, you were saying, is it because if like the heartfelt element to acknowledgement and recognition, and that it was a correct leading question because that is a part of it. It has to be heartfelt. Like I could send you. This is the first time Rob and I have met, but I could automate an email every Friday to go to Rob, going, "Oh, Rob, how are you, mate?"
Yeah.
And after 2, you'd know straight away. Oh, your first time you'd be like, "Oh, that's really nice of Matt. We only met once, and he's checking in on me." And then you'd see it's 3:30 on a Friday, and that's what companies sometimes do. They find the data out, and they're like, "Oh, I can hack this," but you can't hack like making people safe, making them think, right, Rob actually is interested in my future career, even if it's not in this organization.
That makes sense. So, okay, what about the middle case where the organization might not be a great cultural fit, but they're trying to go on a transformation journey from a sort of
Yeah,
people and culture perspective? They might bring in a particularly visionary people person or do it by accident. And he or she then wants to bring you in as an agent of change,
yeah,
but you know that they're not representative of the client at
yeah,
large. I went through this a lot with my communication business where we'd have a visionary people person, knew they needed to be a more communicative organization. It wasn't a communicative
yeah,
organization. And I died on that hill many times
yeah.
alongside that visionary customer champion. What's your sense or your approach in that situation? Do you sort of, are you their ally in trying to transform the organization?
So this is where, have you heard that saying? Data is the plural of anecdote.
I haven't, but it sounds smart. I'll probably steal it now.
So when you get that inspirational person in, they're like one anecdote. They're one person. They're one voice. Whereas when you start that's the power of what we do. Is when you start collecting data. The problem with and this is an issue of communications in companies, is often everyone's seeing the same data but in different ways. And the picture will be there, but until you bring the data out to tell the stories, you can't link it up. So what we're looking for to work with that advocate might be, what's your staff retention rate? Like, how many sick days are people taking off a year for well-being? how many people leave that you recruit within the first 4 months? How many people are referring their friends and family to work in this organization? So you start to get these numbers, and then you can start to paint a picture, because the inspirational person might go, I can tell people are unhappy here, but they might not have the data. Then they get the data. But even when you got the data, some people will go, so what? So what? But then suddenly you go, you know what? If you changed your retention rate from 25% to 15%, that would save the company £1.5 million. Then suddenly the CFO goes, oh, wow, that's massive. And then all of a sudden you get people in the different areas, and then marketing here that, oh, did you know that? I think I remember going to some of the big, an event of a meetup of all the big consultancy firms, and someone said they spend more money on their alumni network than they do on their marketing. So I was a bit like, I don't really understand why that is. And they said because 90% of their business is referrals through their alumni network. So then suddenly marketing go, oh, wow, did you know referrals are going to be up by 20% if people who leave here are actually happy when they leave, rather than us treating them like traitors? And then suddenly they're referring business back. All of the bits start to come together. And then that's where the magic starts to happen.
That's quite a nuanced point, isn't it? But I can completely buy into what you're saying. So you'll disqualify an organization where the leader that you're dealing with is an outright poor fit for vision. But
Yep.
if you're dealing with someone that believes, you'll then kind of coach and ally with them to try and make a positive impact
Yeah.
in their organization.
Yeah. And don't
Right?
get me wrong, Rob, I still fall into my own trap. I haven't got it down to 0%, because you meet this brand and you're like, it would be great. It would be great
Yeah.
to get this person or this individual or this company, and we still repeat the mistake, but we don't repeat the mistake as many times. And then you might be working with a salesperson and they really want to work on that account, and you'll have a conversation. You go, yeah, let's give it a go. And so I don't want to present the picture that we are perfect. We still fall on that. Die on that hill, as you said, a few times, but not as much as we would have done in the past.
Listen, I know you don't have forever to let me quiz you with dumb questions about go to market and happiness, but do you mind if we spend a few minutes talking about your happiness as a founder, and what are the things that have been most impactful for you in being successful and enjoying the ride? So,
Yeah,
for example, one of the big things for me was we talk about this vision and traction concept in EOS land. And for me, it was about setting sensible targets that I could actually hit based on like last quarter, last year's performance, rather than
yeah,
just forever coming up with fantasy numbers designed to impress my investors and stakeholders,
yeah,
and then inability to actually make the trains run in accordance with that vision.
yeah,
Being really clear on values was another big one for me. So that, because I'm not a great manager, it turns out it's massively easier if you build a team that is naturally aligned to begin with. Those are probably the two big ones for me.
yeah.
What are the things that have most informed your well-being as a founder?
Well, we start every founder meeting. It's on the agenda with founder happiness. So we check in how we are feeling ourselves. That is quite specific to the happiness index, because my business partner for my first one, we didn't call it founder happiness. We just like, it's a well-being check-in. But we actually score it. We don't use the happiness index. This is like, the happiness index is great, and people can go to our website and sign up. But you could start doing this stuff without, like, even in our internal founder meetings, there's three of us, trio, and we just say, what's your founder happiness? Firstly, in your private life, and firstly at work, and we rate both. And then everyone gets to talk about, all three of us talk about why we scored it the way we did and how they interplay and all that kind of stuff. And it just means we get all of that out at the beginning. So I'd say number one. Number two, I agree with you on your point, which is so many times people chase numbers that they've read about. Oh yeah, I've been to, like, we went to SaaS. Oh yeah, the average, this, that, the other, and this and that, and then people are looking for this multiple, and blah 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 blah. And it's all BS. You've got to work out your own numbers and work out what you'll be proud of. I blame Strava for this. You know, the riding. So I blame Strava for a lot of things, but like, let's say you've just started cycling 2 weeks ago and you haven't cycled since you were a kid, and you go up a hill, but the person who went up there before you is Bradley Wiggins, you don't know. or someone went up on a motorbike. It's just lies, damn lies, and statistics are the problem, and that's why. So I agree with you on your point. Like, just understanding what success looks like for yourself is really important. And then the third one, which came in my first coaching session. So I do believe that founders should have a mix of a coach, a mentor, and what I'd call like an inspirational group. And that, it sounds a bit more sophisticated than it is, but it could be a group of 4 or 5 other founders that you're in a WhatsApp group and you maybe go for a meal every 6 months. So I've got a group of those people that are going through the challenges together. But my coach, who's our head of neuroscience, Clive Highland, in our first session, he said to me, do you listen to your body? I was like, what do you mean? And that was our first session ever. And that was in 2008. And your body will tell you stuff about what's happening to your well-being. But you, as a founder, you could ignore it because you're so obsessed with the goal.
Yes.
You've only got one body. Like, you can have 20 startups, you can have 25. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. But you've only got one body, and you've only got one family, and all these things. So listening to your body, like when it's telling you need a rest, because work is a diminishing return. Off air, Rob and I were talking about the problem is if you read in the press, you've either got like hustle culture here, which is where you must work 25 hours a day or you won't be a success, or you must meditate for 25 hours a day or you won't be a success. There doesn't seem to be any middle. And for me, there's a beautiful middle where you can, like, working hard, still viable thing to say that's okay. But you should be able to go, you know what, actually, I need a rest. I need to go for a walk at lunch. I need to take a holiday. I need to turn my phone off. All those things, the world is not going to end if you take a rest. And you've got to think of it like a diminishing return. If you try to sprint a marathon, it's not going to work. And that for me, that's what startup life is like.
Matt, thank you so much for being so open and bringing that you've hinted at the depths of geekiness that are available for those that.
No, we can go really deep, Rob.
Are you happy for me to put your LinkedIn link in the show notes, and for folks that are interested to follow you and maybe try and slide into your DMs?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Not that you needed more entrepreneurial karma, but you've earned it, and nevertheless.
No, thanks for having me on, Rob.